everyone, Ivy Gaming here, and today we're playing Dragonheir Silent Gods. For today's video, I'm gonna do a top 10 tips for maximizing your damage against the Resurgent Dragon. Alright, so this video is for everybody, whether you're in a Kraken Alliance, whether you're in a baby alliance that barely does things, whether you are free to play or you're a Kraken yourself, it doesn't matter. This advice is the same for everybody. And I'm going to go through these top 10 tips to really get the most out of your damage. So we are here, Resurgent Dragon, Endgame content. It's supposed to be hard. It's not supposed to be easy, guys. Yeah, there needs to be goals for the end. That makes the season end exciting. Now, I have to say there's one thing that's really bad timing. If you click on mine, we're already at almost 50%. And this is only our day 2. So an actance that gets the boss dead in 3 or 4 days? What? 4 days? Then what are we gonna do until December 15th? What the hell are we gonna do to December 15th? Luckily, I already kind of assumed we would be done early. And I have lots of Feywild and Pillar of Trial to still do. I can fight NPCs and do other stuff. But yeah, that's something that the game hopefully can adjust their timings. I mean, of course, they give people a long time to fight the Resurgent Dragon, but we're gonna have some downtime. All right, but anyway, this is about tips. So let's talk about it. I'm not gonna worry about breaking down each skill and all that now. We're just gonna kind of go in. And I'm gonna go through my tips and how they pertain to everything. The best tip to start off with, number 1, is in order to get the best damage possible, you want to make sure that your team survives the whole fight. All of the people. If you can't survive the whole fight, then you need more support, healing, or shields, or something else, or you need to just improve your defense or HP. Like, just improving a little bit of defense and HP to make the one person that keeps dying survive could be your key. Like, for me, I think, even, like, Losenia died a little early. She's only 1500 defense. So that makes sense when my other people that survived were a little bit better than that, you know? Like, everyone that did okay, like, 1800 defense was enough, but maybe 1500 defense wasn't enough. Like, kind of playing around and just pumping out a little bit of extra stats, or else does she have gear? Did she even have all her gear? Okay, she did. But yeah, obviously my people are getting their gear swapped, so not everyone's in full gear right now. But having a decent bit of HP and defense on your super squishy damage dealers is sometimes needed, but not every time, because it depends on what you have to go along with them. But if you can survive the whole fight, then you're great. If you can survive the whole fight and you feel like your damage is a little low, try taking out some support. Or taking out a tank that's not doing much. Taking out a healer. If you have 2 healers, try only using 1 healer. If you have survivability extra stats on your DPS heroes because you were worried that they'd die, maybe pump up their damage and take those down a little bit and test. See what you can do to maximize your damage while still staying alive, and you're going to go a lot further than half your team dying halfway through the battle, you know? It makes a really big difference. And on that note, tip number 2, you don't need a tank. You don't need a tank. But if your tank actually brings some extra help, it can be great. So for me, I actually ended up doing a really interesting team number 2 here. I think this team ended up doing like 50 or 60 million. I was pretty surprised. And yes, I have Irma, a tank. But Irma as a tank brings damage reduction for all allies. She brings some HP recovery, some hit recovery. And that sort of thing can go a long way. If you're doing you know, a poison or fire team and you have Furboth, he's bringing heals and attack penalty, so that can go a long way. So it depends on who your tank is, but don't just put a tank in there for the sake of having a tank. It's not really gonna help. Like, okay, my Urion, has amazing damage mitigation, and brings attack penalty again. So he is fun, but honestly, the team survived really well thanks to a lot of the shields on this team. So maybe a test for optimizing the damage on my best team here would be to take out my tank that's bringing the decreased attack and damage mitigation. See if my shields and my heals from Voresh can be enough and put in more DPS. Like, that's the kind of test you want to do if you're experiencing low damage and you have a tank in your team. Like, see if it's really necessary, and or if you have multiple healers, you know, kind of play around and optimize your team. And this is a good example for my next tip number 3. Shields are insane for this. So shields bring amazing survivability, right? And there's a lot of heroes that put up shields. Obviously, I'm using the Adventure as one example. Who else did I use with shields? I feel like I used someone else. I think some people had, like, I think there's like a little extra bonus shield. I guess, oh, in my lightning team, which I need to do next, Nathaniel. So let me bring in this team. So Nathaniel in this team, he is a shield hero, right? So he is going to help keep everyone alive with his shields. His shields are based on target max HP and enlightenment. So he'd be built with enlightenment, ideally. That's just a really, really big survivability tip because the boss has this really annoying passive. Where is it? The passive for the boss, which you can read when you go into the battle, the little P that shows up at the very beginning of all the skills. The passive for the boss, it reduces your max HP of the target, of you, by a certain percentage of the actual damage dealt every time it deals damage. That adds up a lot. And you'll go through your battle and you'll notice that your bar of health above your heroes is getting lower and lower and lower. Just like in Raid Shadow Legends, we have enemy max HP, right? Reduction, that's a thing in Raid Shadow Legends. That's the same kind of idea here. And you can prevent that by having shields on your people. If you have a shield, you're taking less damage. And that makes your HP go down less, which is huge. Like, there was some of the fights I had, like my wild people, that wild is just not great for this because you really want AoE damage as well. I think it was like toward the end of the battle, they'd have like half their health. So I don't even know how they stayed alive. It was rough. It was rough. It got a little messy. But my squishy wild people somehow did an okay key, but nothing crazy, honestly. Nothing crazy at all compared to other teams, like where I thought that might be my best team. But shields can make a really big difference. All right, next up is the conversation of energy manipulation. So there is this big thing here. I think it's with the ultimate. These look a little different than it looks here. Let's see. Right here. The Copper Dragon gains 4 stacks of Power of Dragon Rage when battle starts or after casting Dragon's Roar. When any unit on the battlefield triggers ultimate up or ultimate down, the effect will be nullified, and 1 stack of the buff will be consumed instead. So this is really big, making sure that you are taking down this rage, because at the end when the boss does its skill, it kind of goes into this weak state, which is really cool. If there's no power of rage, it will go into weak. So you need to make sure there's no power of rage by getting down those stacks by manipulating energy regeneration. And the best ways to do that are more than what you think. So, all right, let's not click him. What does he have? Where's my people with? Do I have anyone in this team with the thing? Yeah, so like the incense burner increases the wearer's ultimate energy by 10% after unleashing an ultimate skill. That's a good one to use. There's also the candle. I actually have the candle on my Asilia for this battle, just as another way to manipulate ultimate energy. And you might be like, but that's a battle skill, that's not ultimate. For some reason, even though it is specifically for recharging a battle skill, it does seem to read as ultimate energy, like increase. When you watch it happen in the battlefield, if you watch it, you'll see ultimate energy up, and you're like, but I thought that's the battle skill. Ultimate energy doesn't mean directly ultimate energy, which is why I was confused. When I started playing this yesterday, we watched my first look, I'm like, why are people saying use the candle? It doesn't help. It's a battle skill, but for some reason, it seems to calculate as any type of energy, not just your ultimate skill affected, but actually all of them. That could be as simple as someone like a Megan, who I've already used. Megan has ultimate energy manipulation on her, which she's amazing for this fight, guys. By the way, Megan, amazing for this fight. Where's all my people that were used? Okay. So Megan recharges their ultimate energy with her battle skill. So if you put the candle on her and she comes back to her battle skill even more frequently and keeps doing this, you're going to be in a pretty good position. There's a lot of heroes that have like ultimate energy up, like actually my Oster did. I totally forgot. That was so funny. His passive, like if, let's see, blah, blah, blah. Damage dealt by tracking arrow also increases the hero's ultimate energy by 2.5%. So like Oster has ultimate energy manipulation in his passive. And then there's other people you can talk about for this, like, I guess, Adri. Did I ever end up, I never built her. She has, where is it? Her ultimate. She reduces the enemy's ultimate energy. So it could be a boost to yours or a reduction to the enemy to help keep those stacks away. If the stacks are away, the boss kind of goes down into this nullified state. And when the boss is in this nullified state, they take extra damage. So where does it say that? Let's see. Where is the description? Right here. So it will enter weak state for 5 seconds, during which it will take 50% more damage. Otherwise, it will remove its debuffs. So it's really important to actually use some sort of energy manipulation up and down either way, because that is just huge, honestly. It really makes a big difference. So I'm actually going to say the next tip, why don't I move my tips around here as I literally move them in my list to keep myself organized. With that in mind, when the enemy is in the nullified state, they're taking 50% more damage, right? So if you successfully did the last tip of energy manipulation, then tip number 5, hold your ultimates if you can sometimes. I'm not saying hold them throughout the whole fight because you're kind of going to hold yourself back from doing more damage. But if you can semi-manual your fight and then wait to pop your big ult, well, that's a bad example. He just increases his attack. You can wait to pop your actual ult that's going to do your best damage until boom, right when the enemy is he does the big red flash, and then if he has no power of whatever the hell that's called, he goes down and he's kind of in the spinning dazed state. He's going to take 50% more damage. It's so much more damage, right? It really, really is. And that's a good time where if you notice your people are getting close to using their ultimates toward the end, hold them. Wait for a second. Wait for a few seconds, if like partway through. If you can cycle some of them at least to try to hit as much as possible and semi-manual your battle, you're going to get so much more damage out of your battle than if you just let it go completely 100% auto, which we're going to talk about in a second as well. But yeah, that is like in Watcher of Realms when you fight the guild boss, and after you break the shield of the guild boss, the boss is in that state with the spinny. That's exactly like this here, where they take extra damage. So that's another good comparison for all of us playing other games. So the next tip I'm going to say is number 6, debuff prevention. Obviously, the boss puts up some pretty bad debuffs. Recharge speed penalty is not ideal to get placed, because if you are trying to actually set timers, which are 30 to 35 seconds, depending on whether or not the boss goes into that state or not, you're not going to stay in sync. You're going to mess up your battle. So if you can prevent the debuffs from happening in the first place and not have to cleanse it later, you're going to keep your people with the most amount of, you're going to keep them being able to use their skills as much as possible, not slow them down at all with this. So if you can prevent that debuff and this debuff from happening completely, you don't have to worry about cleansing. So you're looking for the debuff immunity heroes like Catherine, obviously the legendary Asilia, but I wish there were more, to be fair. I shouldn't say there's so many. I wish there were a few more, but you can get away with a lot. I think Adri, is it Adri? No, Thea? I always get them confused. Have that as well. But you want to prevent these buffs from happening in the first place. So that is tip number 6. Prevent them from happening in the first place. by making sure you pop the debuff prevention buff before the recharging speed penalty. Now, if you're not sure if you have heroes that perform those roles, remember, guys, everything is mostly easy to find. Unfortunately, the ultimate energy stuff you can't sort because they don't have instance. They have buffs, debuffs, and control, but no instance. They really need to add instance. But let's say you're looking for a buff, debuff immunity. Who do you have in your roster that does debuff immunity? Oh yeah, Garion. I forget, I barely use him. He can do that, but it's only one person. So just pay attention there. Don't be too excited if you're like, oh, I got one, then instantly max them out, and then realize they only do that for one person. Gladros is another really good example. Debuff immunity and shields. Our friend Odd One Gaming, our friend, my husband, is going to be making a video showcasing that fella. So stay tuned for that and watch that today if you haven't already. Heads up on that one. If it's not out yet, it will be soon. So you always can check to see what you have for your heroes. All right, so the next point would be if you cannot prevent the buffs from happening in the first place, you're going to need a cleanser. So that could be someone like a Vikuk, right? Where's our Vikuk? Vikuk here on the end. He cleanses 2 debuffs. Some people can cleanse all debuffs. Tip number 7 is if you can't prevent them in the first place, then you're going to want to try to dispel them. Another good example, not in this team right here, I guess I could take a look. Where are we going? Is Fitz. Fitz can transfer all ally debuffs to himself. And if you give him resistance, he doesn't actually take them. So this might be an interesting example where you, again, actually use a tank in the battle, even though you don't need to, because you don't have any other way of cleansing and helping to keep your people alive. If you're dying because those defense penalty debuffs are on your heroes, well, Fitz could be the answer. I know this sounds silly, but hey, there is some neat reasons to use a tank, even though you don't really need to, if they perform other roles. That, yeah, like the dispelling of debuffs from himself, or this is just building him with whatever resist you need for the sake of your alliance boost or not. Yeah, that makes a huge difference. So he's a really good shout for that tip right there. All right, tip number 8 is that everything I just said isn't always needed. Yes, it's not always needed. My team right here is a really good example. So this is the funny part. So attack penalty, right? That's a great damage mitigation thing. Almost every team should have that. Healing, great. Shields, great. Honestly, when it comes to dispelling and preventing, you might get away without it if you have a good shielder. So I have to call out, like, this team is my best example. So honestly, right now I have better accuracy on my Urion than I had before. But with my battle I did yesterday that did over 80 million damage, Urion didn't have enough accuracy to land the decreased attack all the time. So I did not have attack penalty consistently. It's only on a battle skill as well. I did not have a dispeller of debuffs, and I did not have debuff immunity. I took all the defense penalty debuffs that happened. But you know what? We had good shields with the adventurer. Really, really good shields. And we had heals from Voresh. That was it. Voresh was my only healer. I don't even have a proper healer in this team. It just shows how good shields are. So, depending on your team at the end of the day, it really is about how they flow together, how everything works together, that just because you're like, oh, I need to prevent these debuffs. Maybe you don't. This team didn't need to prevent debuffs. I had 2 massive damage dealers. Oster and Drist did like the same damage. They were amazing. Obviously, my Drist is Inspiration 5. But still, that can be the same for you. If you can keep your whole team alive without worrying about dispelling the debuffs, and you're still doing really good damage, you might be okay. So it comes down to synergy at the end of the day. And that's a really just important part to remember, that depending on your team, you might not need to worry about the defense penalty debuff. It might be fine. Or you might need a lovely, lovely Megan to get rid of the defense penalty debuff because of her passive. So that can really, really help as well when she when she uses her ultimate, because you keep everyone grouped together, she's gonna dispel defense penalties. So Megan can be your cleanser, but maybe you don't need her. Maybe instead of Megan, you just have your dang adventurer with the shields. So you have to experiment. And yeah, speaking of what we were just showing there, positioning really matters. So my tip number 9 is about positioning. Tip number 9 here, lightning team. Let me bring this in as an example. So I have a Nathaniel, and shields are amazing, right? So we want Nathaniel in the team. So we want to make sure that he has stuff to help. So right here, Nathaniel, boom. You want to keep people grouped together to make sure he can actually put the shields on everybody. Oh wait, he also can help even more with some recovery over time and dispelling a debuff with his battle skill. So if the timing isn't perfect with the other people in your team, maybe he'll time well to remove those recharge penalties, and then Megan could... Oh, wait, other people. Acilia will dispel stuff too. Let's not talk about Acilia. But anyway, whether you have him in your Lightning, Radiance, Focus team, whatever, you can combine them all at this point for this battle. You want this to affect all your allies, so people need to be around him properly. So we have a couple spaces behind him to have that covered, and then a couple spaces nearby as well should be covered here. So I think technically, yeah, she'll be fine. And then this spot is fine. And if someone runs into this spot, they'll be fine as well if we had which is going to happen here with my Acilia. She's going to run into this spot, I think, is what ended up happening. So just paying attention to your position or your positioning for people does make a difference. I think there's some people like Filto and Eli with weird ultimates, or Zadok, or just people that have smaller ranges for like how they smash, not this big ol' range. It seems to be okay for the sake of AoE damage if you position them in this line. So that's kind of my bonus tip with this tip number 9 is AoE damage is key against this boss. If you're noticing that your Flora is doing command damage and your Erich is doing surprisingly more, it's because he's hitting more things. You need to be able to hit the claws, the tail, the dragon, and that counts as AoE, and that's really what you want. But they seem to do okay about hitting everything, at least if they're positioned in this second row. Same is true for Sigrid, guys. So Sigrid does actually fire 3 arrows. I noticed it. 3 arrows go out. So she's actually doing AoE damage, so she'll probably be pretty good for your poison or fire focused teams. So keep Sigrid in mind with the way her ultimate works with inflicting damage on multiple enemies. It does actually bring you more damage. All right, and our final tip for this video is being willing to manual. Let me just, you know what? Let me go into this battle because I gotta do it anyway. And we're running out of time. See, all right, so this is great, right? But what about Acilia? When do we want to use her? When do we want to use her? Oh wait, she's gonna dispel all buffs from all allies. We don't want to use her right now, right? Well, I just did, as I use it right now accidentally because I dragged it. We want to use that right after this, before this. But you know what? Early in the fight, you can just let everything go, kind of. Maybe, sort of, not really. Let me explain that. But right before this ultimate, if you're having someone who dispels debuffs, that's when they should be going. And it might take manualing to do that, because if you're throwing in the recharging speed penalty that the boss does here, you're not going to stay in perfect sync. It's going to get out of sync. The other example would be if you're trying to prevent the debuffs in the first place. You want to pop them right before this ultimate, and then they'll be, as long as they have something that lasts for like, 10 seconds. We got this at 6 seconds. This happens 6 seconds later. So in 6 seconds, if you do this at like, here, you'll have like 7-8 seconds to hopefully be able to prevent it. Although actually the defense penalty happens kind of in the middle, so it can be a little risky. So if you have someone who does like a debuff immunity for 10 seconds, you want to try to pop it right before this ultimate as close as possible. So that way by the time the boss actually swipes with his tail, there's a little bit of delay. Like watch when he uses this skill defense penalty. It's not now, it's now. It's like a delay, So you kind of gotta watch it and be sure to time things right. So when it comes to cleansing, again, you don't want to cleanse the second he does defense penalty skill because he hasn't even placed it yet. You actually need to wait to just before the ultimate because it gotta wait for that silly dragon swipe. The other examples can be timing your damage dealers. If you have someone that does more damage when the enemy's under frost, you want to make sure frost is up in the first place. So if you have to time that properly to make sure your debuff placer goes before the other damage dealers, well, then you gotta do that, right? You really gotta do that. And here, like, I didn't do enough stacks to get the boss to go into its special state. So I don't have enough of the ultimate energy manipulation. But if I did, right when the boss does the ultimate, again, that's what I was talking about, maybe holding your ultimates to time things correctly. So that way, okay, right now, Yola's about to go. She's got the defense penalty. If I was to hold her and now use it to make sure we have that up for the sake of, boom, defense penalty landed. Now, okay, Theravol's gonna go. Ultimate. Hopefully. After the... Oh, I should have waited. See, the boss is in the state. If I waited for right now for Theravol's ultimate, that would have done 50% more damage. That's where timing matters. There's so many things in this battle where timing does matter to optimize your absolute best potential damage. And if you're not happy with your damage, or people are dying early, or they're just... You have to be willing to manual or semi-manual time some things. So again, Theravol, I'm not going to use his ultimate unless, let's see, boom. Okay, he's down. Let's use Theravol's ultimate. Go, 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 go. We just got 50% more damage out of Theravol's hit if I just did it 1 second before. You know what I mean? That is just a huge part of manualing. You can't expect perfection. You can't expect the big numbers. You can't expect to do as good as the people at the top of your leaderboards or the content creators that are putting out videos if you're not willing to take the time to understand the boss mechanics and time things when it make the most sense for your battles. So I see people, I mean, yes, you can get away with full auto and crazy damage, sure, you can. But if you want to get even further and you want to push it even further and try to get the best rank possible, manualing is really the answer. But it's really hard to manual everybody, obviously, so you might want to pick and choose, like, being aware of certain parts of the battle and trying to focus those things you think are more important for your given team. Or you can try to set up your timings as well. If you notice, if every single time this boss does its ultimate, he goes down, see, there's a consistency, but this time he didn't. So for me, as an example, this team is not consistent enough to set up timings, because sometimes it'll be about 30 seconds, which is like the full rotation of skills, and sometimes it'll be 35 seconds because the boss is down in that state after being weakened and taking more damage. So that is just huge, honestly. If you can't consistently do that, you can't consistently keep your interval timings, so you might have to semi-manual. Or this is like every other time for me. It's so not consistent. So, yep, that's all, guys. 10 tips. A little bit of a longer video, but I really hope that these tips help you guys to maximize your damage in the Resurgent Dragon. Overall, keep everyone alive, try to bring AoE damage, and just be aware of shields. I think those are the biggest things I have to say from this. But yeah, there was a whole bunch more listed that we talked about. Hope it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.